There is so much that has already been said about the events in Baltimore this week. Many are drawing attention to widespread issues with policing in communities across the nation, including ours, particularly in how police officers treat people of color. Our line opinion panelists represent different perspectives each week here on New Mexico in Focus, and we're ready to talk about the U.S. Justice Department and law enforcement issues this week. I'm joined at the table by Dan Foley, former New Mexico House Minority Whip, Martha Burke, a political psychologist and women's issues expert and author of Your Voice, Your Vote, The Savvy Woman's Guide to Change. Laura Sanchez-Rive from Sanchez Legal Solutions is here, as is Rob Nikolewski from thewatchdog.org. Now, Laura, starting with you, along the lines events in Baltimore we'll get to, but interestingly, Loretta Lynch did finally get confirmed, and she's been very clear on that she wants to bring some changes in the relationship between police departments and the community. There's only so much anyone can do. Eric Holder has taken his shot at this, certainly. He's brought about a lot of changes. But the dynamic, how do you see it with a new Justice Department head?
Well, I don't really buy that there's only so much someone can do.
Okay.
I really think that position can walk their talk. And I think there's a lot of people that might criticize Eric Holder for not doing enough, especially not filing charges, federal charges in the Ferguson issue. I think he had a lot of challenges to deal with, but Loretta Lynch comes from the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. She spent 8 years there and worked on some of the very high-profile issues that are really important in terms of counterterrorism. She also was, back in the late 90s, in the early part of her career, she was a Brooklyn prosecutor.
Right.
She worked on the Abner Louima case, which was a terrible case of police brutality. And I think that she has a lot of her personal experience that reflects the kind of, I think, position that the Justice Department should be taking on some of these issues. So I think that, I'm optimistic about what she can do.
Martha Burke, inside all of this, of course, we've got Ferguson, as mentioned by Laura. We've got New York City situation. We've got a lot of cases out there going back to Trayvon Martin, and long before that, certainly. These are just the highest profile cases that the rest of America knows about, so to speak. Is it your sense this woman represents some change, fundamental change in how this dialogue on race is happening in America?
She's pretty much said that, Gene. She said at her confirmation or right after that what she wanted to do was build some bridges between the communities and the policing and make people understand what the police are up against as well as what the community is up against. And that's one of the things Holder was criticized for, that he did not seem to want to get a dialogue going. So she has said that. I think she's shown from her work in New York that she can do that. What I worry about is she hasn't got a lot of time.
Right.
She inherited a lot. Baltimore came 2 days after she was confirmed. She's got 18 months. So it's going to be a hustle.
Sure. You think of locally here, Rob, we've got our situation here, certainly. We'll get to some APD local things. But in the broadest sense, there is a discussion happening here in Albuquerque as well, and New Mexico as well, about how these things unfold, what constitutes justice, what is redress. There's a lot of issues going here. How do you see this whole thing happening right now?
Well, one of the concerns I've got about Ms. Lynch is that, it's unrelated to the what's going on in Baltimore and other cities, is she, during her confirmation hearing, she said that she was in favor of civil asset forfeiture. And I think that kind of set off a yellow light in my mind, because civil asset forfeiture, fortunately, New Mexico's a bit ahead of the curve on this one. The legislature and the governor signed a bill to outlaw that, which I think it's a terrible miscarriage of justice, of taking people's property before they're even convicted of something. So I hope Ms. Lynch can make some progress on this issue as far as cities go. But as far as the city issues go, I think it's a complicated one, because there's not a direct correlation between Ferguson and Baltimore. Now, a lot of the critics of the Ferguson situation said, well, this is in Ferguson, this was an area where you had a police department that was overwhelmingly white in an overwhelmingly black district. But in Baltimore, that's not the case. Almost 50% of the members of the Baltimore police force are black. And in an overwhelming majority of the people in Baltimore are black. So I think race touches upon this, but it's also a question about families. And it's also a question about social pathology. That's a much more complex question rather than just a race question.
Part of that complexity, Dan, is the fact that there's a lot of complaints that there were peaceful protests in Baltimore in the weeks leading up to the unpeaceful protest, and no one seemed to care. The media didn't seem to care. But now, you know, a beloved business, CVS, gets burned and some other things get burned. Suddenly, everyone cares. What does that do to the dialogue? How is one supposed to assess these things if
Well,
that
I think
kind
it
of media
encourages that
coverage?
action. I think it feeds that action. It's saying if you don't take this to the next level, people aren't listening to you.
Right.
I also think it's the profiteering off a race that's happening in this country. You know, I think the Al Sharptons of the world are feeding this monster.
In what way?
Because they don't. There's no need for him and what he does unless we go to the level we've gone to now. He doesn't have a role in a peaceful protest. It's not his It's not his wheelhouse. He has to show up when there's a problem. And I think that people like him continue to feed that dialogue to cause that problem. I think it's been interesting to see, I was watching last night, this morning there was a report about a photojournalist in Baltimore that got attacked and that some gang members surrounded him and saved him from known gang members, and were shouting, "Stop it, this is how we're going to get our message out." And so, you know, I think you see the actions, you know, from the mayor saying, give them their distance, let them take care, it's only property. You know, that type of stuff, I think, is feeding this frenzy that is encouraging these people to go from the peaceful protesting, getting their point across, making change, making a difference, to, I think, really hurting the situation.
Well, it depends. Laura Sanchez, I'm going to swing to something local here. We've got an APD officer, this is interesting to me, alleged, and now we've got a lot more information about beating a homeless man before he turned on his camera, and he was outed by a cadet. I thought that was a very interesting situation. What did you make of that? Your gut reaction, you heard a cadet, someone literally in training to be a police officer, has drawn a line in the sand. A cadet. Interesting.
My reaction was that he's not entrenched enough in the culture, in the culture of the police to keep quiet about that. And I think that's a really important thing. I mean, the Chief Eden and the mayor and everybody need to change the culture at APD. Everybody else who was involved, well, the two officers, were more than happy to, and maybe as a routine thing, to just go with one story and report back officially what had occurred based on their one story. This cadet questioned that and went to a supervisor, and I think did the right thing ethically.
Yeah.
Clearly, that person, that cadet is not yet, immersed in whatever culture and norms they have at the police department. And I think that's a really important sign, a red flag for the rest of us to see that really what they're doing is not above board. This idea of going live and there was like a signal, okay, we're going to go live now and turn on our cameras, that's insane.
I think, though, what we need to watch is what's going to happen to this cadet.
Yeah.
Is he going to make it?
Because he has been named. He wasn't in the first.
Named,
exactly.
and the other guys know who he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So down the road, is he still going to be a police officer?
And I think it's unfair. I think and I know you're not blaming, I don't want to make that correlation. I think it's unfair to say that Eaton and Barry have to change this culture. This culture has been in place for 50, 60 years. I think it's us that has to change the culture. It's the public that has to say enough's enough. We're the ones that have got to say you've got to do more. You know, when you hear them talking about dropping the standards to become a police officer, and we just kind of go, well, we need more cops. Well, do we need more cops? I don't know if we do.
You're right, because this guy that did the beating, if my math is correct, he was recruited as a 20-year-old.
I think you're
now,
right.
There's a problem there.
He's 24 currently.
Well, the other thing, too, is that I assume that the guy who's been accused of this beating, he had the 60 hours of college credit. And we talked about this last week.
Yes, we did.
I love education. I've got 2 master's degrees, but I think their character counts more than college
Absolutely.
does. And I think that's a very interesting thing to notice. The second thing is that I think it's possibly, we're always looking for positive signs. I think it's a positive sign that the cadets did out of
definitely positive.
This
and the
And
question
to
is
your point about character, does it not show the cadet has something of character coming in the door?
But the question is
Should that be
his
celebrated?
character going to be stomped on by the character of the police department? Are you going to take the shining light and say, this is what we need to do, and are you going to feed him to the wolves that 3 weeks from now he's out of the... Because we've seen this before.
That's what I mean by,
they may wait a little
I'm certainly
while,
not saying that Mayor Barry or Chief Chief
Right.
Eden caused this culture. But I think they're the leaders. You know, Chief Eden is a leader, and he has an opportunity to change the culture or to try to change the culture. And certainly,
agree.
whatever he does with regard to this cadet is important, and whatever he does in terms of signaling to new potential recruits what the tolerance is for this sort of
And
behavior
I'll tell you, one of
is
the
going to be
people
super
that I think is
important.
going to be that is crucial, and this is not, I'm not taking a shot at them, but the people that are going to have to step up to the table and make this work is going to be the police union, because they keep running behind these contracts that say you got to do 18 things before you. You know what? If we're going to have a zero tolerance policy, two people stepping forward saying this is what you've done, you're done. You're
There
done.
was also an interesting complaint about this officer, kind of down the story a little bit.
saw that.
That was very disturbing
Yeah,
to me. I wonder,
absolutely,
Could
on
you talk to
women's
that a little
issues.
bit? It was very interesting.
Yeah,
to
I
me.
mean, this same police officer, there had been a complaint from a mother about her daughter who had complained that she'd been
Groped by a
groped by
businessman.
somebody. And when the police officer went to investigate it, he sort of,
Told her
I mean,
her dress,
accused
told her
her,
her dress
I
was
think-
too short and she had a bad attitude.
Right, and
right.
that's just, that's not acceptable to turn that into, the victim's problem, like she was asking for it.
But this is the problem, I believe, in this country with the dialogue about the police department. And I'm going to tell you right now, as a conservative Republican that has supported the police, supported the prosecutors, the problem is they're not always right. And we want to
Thank you.
constantly say, if you attack these bad people, you're attacking the system. The system is broken. These are bad people. I'm telling you right now, Gene, none of this hate and stuff should be accepted and tolerated from anybody. But when I give you a badge and a gun, you are held to a higher standard than the average person. And when we let these people that we find out when they finally kill somebody, when they finally beat somebody, and all of a sudden the media finds out that they've been in trouble 18 times, they've been suspended 5 times, they've been relocated 4 times, and now we're surprised this happened. We have nobody to blame but ourselves.
Well, and here's the
enough's
thing.
enough.
Yeah, it's
You know,
not, it's not an
there's this
either-or
issue-
situation, too. I mean, it's possible that two conflicting things can be true. We can't have bad cops and we can't have bad people out of the street.
Well,
the
and this
other
issue
thing-
of the media is really important. I mean, he just said, when the media finds out. I think this is where the chief can do a lot to help in terms of public trust and transparency. This issue where he pre-taped something on YouTube and then released that instead of actually standing for questions at a press conference, I think is the wrong way to go. And I think it signals that he's trying to avoid any questions that might be uncomfortable. The media, I think, understands when you say you can't talk about an ongoing investigation or you can't talk about a personnel matter. I think both of those things are standard. But to have a pre-taped YouTube video released is just not the way to address these
and good
issues.
for Channel 7 for calling him out on that. This is where the mayor should step in, though.
That's right.
I mean, he's the guy.
That's right. That was Mary Lynn
needs
Roper
to
at Channel
say,
7.
this will
Excellent.
not stand. You've got to talk.
It's going to be
him."
interesting to find out if this, though, if this is something that council is telling them with all the stuff going on right now. We're not going to let you stand in front of the media. We got to get all this stuff with the
Well, now they have
Department
new
of Justice
counsel,
figured
so
out.
Makes it look like
maybe their new
I agree.
counsel
I
can
think,
work on that.
I think what I find interesting, though, is that all of this is going on, and the feds haven't said anything. It seems like they would have jumped in early and said, you need to get out with this more transparency thing.
right.
So there could be more to that than we know.
That's right.
But at the end of the day, I'm going to tell you right now, as a former elected official, Chief, if you're listening, don't pick a fight with the media. You're not going to win.
Here you go.
That's right.
Up next, we learn what it feels like to win the Boston Marathon.